Welcome one and all to my channel. Today we'll be exploring the game The Final Pin by Lindgren. What will you expect? A detective whose life has been taken over by a case that involves a killer named the Crow Killer. Because of his obsession, those around him suffer or even die. And there's a twist at the end! So sit back, relax, and let's jump right into this. The first thing we get shown is text which explains that serial killers aren't monsters but indeed humans who live amongst us and are the embodiment of our fears and twisted desires. We soon get taken to a flashback of our protagonist leaving his office to be greeted by his wife and son. This is when we learn that our protagonist was starting his first day of his job. His family wished him luck and our protagonist went to meet with Tony, his partner starting from that day forward. Tony seems straightforward and far more serious compared to the other partner that we'll be getting introduced to later in the future. But right now we see the two meeting at a crime scene and our protagonist has to snap photos of the body. Next to the body is a bloody symbol of a crow. The crime was put on a newspaper and it made it clear that the killer's trademark is a crow. So when we see a crow at a crime scene, we know who's responsible. It was 1969 during this, but 12 years passed and it's now 1981. We'll return to the crow killer later, but for now we're going to be going through other cases that our protagonist has to investigate. So our protagonist was standing outside by his cop car until he was radioed in. He was alerted that his partners needed him at an apartment building to do some investigating in room 311. Our protagonist immediately headed straight to the building where we find Tony and Carlos being the other partner that I mentioned earlier. Where Tony seems more mature, Carlos is fun and outgoing. And when we get told about a cranky old lady we have to interview down one floor, Carlos was more than ready to warn us that she was a bitch. Clearly not afraid to speak his mind. Anyways, we meet with a lady named Margaret and we ask her questions regarding what happened to the apartment building above her. We learn that a girlfriend stabbed her 23-year-old boyfriend over a breakup and that Margaret doesn't like the guy but thought the girl had a sweet ass. After this, we move on to investigating the actual crime scene and we snap photos of a mask, bloody handprint, and the knife which was used as the murder weapon. We said goodbye to our partners and when we arrived home, it was empty. And when we entered his bedroom, our protagonist said this. With this, we can assume that our protagonist and his wife are no longer together. He went to sleep and we rewind to 1963, 18 years in the past. This flashback shows us back when Kevin, his son, was a baby and just as we were about to feed him his bottle, the protagonist was startled awake by a bottle breaking and his alarm. Followed by this, our radio alerted us about Tony needing us. So we drive towards Tony's location and learn that a little girl's dog was chasing after a crow and the little girl followed her dog into the tunnels. Tony asked us to find the girl, so we went down below to find her, but unexpectedly, we found something else. Or someone. Once we cornered the man, we discovered it was just a homeless guy named Bill who lived in the tunnels. Bill hasn't seen the girl, but he did hear the dog and said that the dog responded to whistling. With this, we traversed the tunnels, whistling and listening closely to the dog barking to help us navigate around. The tunnels weren't the safest, but we managed to find the little girl and her dog, and rescue them. We returned her to her mother and it was a successful day on the job. We returned to an empty home once again and fall asleep just to rewind to 1968, with the memories of our wife worrying about our line of work. After this, we then awakened to the radio telling us that Tony and Carlos need us for an examination. However, once we arrived at the site, it turns out we weren't needed just for an examination and Tony called us to the site to dive into the water and retrieve a corpse. Carlos happily provided us our swimming gear and we got the body and learned that the body was a man named Connor Giller who lived close to the beach. Carlos took us back to the land so we could investigate his home. After turning the power on, we found a letter in which Carlos explains to his love, Sarah, that he's going to confront their stalker by the bridge and take his gun with him. Too bad things didn't end well for him, because he's a corpse. Anyways, after taking photos of our clues, our protagonist concludes that he has to go to a trailer park to speak to Connor's son in hopes for more information about the incident. It's the next day and we went to the trailer park. After breaking into a few homes, we eventually were able to enter the home of Connor's son and discovered his dismembered body and the symbol of a crow. The crow killer returns! And I think that's Connor's son, but I could be wrong. Anyways, our obsession over the killer strengthens. We return home and sleep on the sofa. Just like the past few times, we rewind to the past in 1978 in which we learn that the reason why our protagonist lives alone now is because his obsession over the crow killer case broke his family. Linda and Kevin rarely see him, and they miss the days when they had their husband and father home. In the end, Linda can't take it anymore and wants a divorce while Kevin states that he hates his father. Ouch. We then awaken to the sound of our radio with terrible news that Carlos, one of our partners, was murdered. We need to go to the station and interview his husband, Dylan. We learn more about Carlos and he was a really good dude. He even found evidence on the crow killer but died before he could show it off. Dylan found his body in a dumpster with the crow symbol. By the end of the interrogation, Dylan asked us to kill the killer when we found him. We left and our protagonist needs a drink. Losing a dear friend and partner isn't easy and speaking to his heartbroken husband was tough, so to cope, our protagonist drinks his sorrows away when he returned home. In his sleep, he remembers a house in which all his clues leads to it. However, he was never allowed to enter the house, which is why he couldn't investigate it. And once again, he was awakened by his radio. This time, he was told to investigate the woods near his home. When he did, he found Tony, his partner, hanging on a tree with a crow symbol nearby. The crow killer strikes again! And we're not happy. We want the killer dead. But first, we took the knife below his feet in order to compare the fingerprints with the existing evidence we have. We went to the station and unexpectedly, the fingerprints didn't match. Could there be two killers in play? Who does this fingerprint belong to? And before we left the station, a letter appeared at the front door. It instructed us to go to the house in the woods, the house where all our evidence connects to. Our protagonist no longer cares about needing permission and went to investigate the home. We need to get to the bottom of this. So we entered the house and started looking around. After solving a few puzzles, we stumbled across a dead body with a crow symbol nearby. Guess whose body it was? The original crow killer. And based on the state of his body, he was dead longer than either of his partners. So he couldn't have been the one to murder them. So who's been doing the recent murders? Who's taken the place of the crow killer? We eventually found ourselves crawling through vents and someone tried stabbing us but missed us with each attempt. Eventually we escaped the vent and entered a room just to be confronted by a guy whose back was to us. Filled with vengeance, we shot him. But once we approached the man, we realized it was Kevin, our son. He was the new crow killer. He gave us his last words, explaining why he did what he did. He wanted to make his father suffer. Suffer like how him and his mother felt when they were left alone because of his father's obsession over the crow killer. And the best way to make his father suffer is by taking the place of the crow killer, killing his partners, and making his father responsible for his son's death, his own death. Kevin wanted to die. In the end, our protagonist left a report of what happened and resigned on the same day. During the interrogation, our protagonist admits that he's the reason why his son turned out the way he did, and why he took the crow killer's trademark. Our protagonist only ever gave attention to the crow killer and never his family, so Kevin decided to become his father's obsession. And in order to further get his father's attention, he killed his two partners, his two best friends. And Kevin knew doing all of this would lead to his death by the hands of his own father. Kevin's motivation was centered around hatred for his father. For us. After everything, our protagonist visited his son's grave to pay his respects, and unexpectedly, his ex-wife appeared. She now realized why the protagonist was so caught up in investigating the case. It was to take the killer to justice in order to protect those he loved, his son and wife. She has so many regrets about the past, but now that it's the present, they could rely on each other during these tough times. She wants to start over. So we did. 2 years passed and we get greeted with familiar faces and the news that our protagonist's wife is pregnant with twin boys. After all the heartbreak and trauma, they healed through it all and our protagonist swears to be a better father for his sons. And this is the final pin. To quickly go through the timeline. Our protagonist and his wife Linda had a child named Kevin, and one day our protagonist is starting a job as a detective. Additionally, murders started popping up with the trademark of a crow at the crime scene, and this leads to our protagonist developing an obsession with solving the case. Because of this obsession, he's rarely home, which causes his family to feel neglected. They had an argument which led to Linda wanting a divorce, and this was the start of Kevin's hatred towards his father. And then on, our protagonist drowns himself in work and lives alone. And his obsession with the crow killer is still evident due to the pinboard in his office. The only thing that seems to be keeping him sane is his two best friends and partners, Carlos and Tony. They may throw the tough jobs at our protagonist, but they clearly have a close bond due to the many years they've worked alongside each other. Sadly, Carlos's dead body was found by his husband, while Tony's dead body was found in the woods near our protagonist's home. Both had the symbol of the crow killer, but after testing the fingerprints, they weren't a match. So our protagonist takes all the clues he collected which connects to the abandoned house and heads straight there. While investigating, he found the original crow killer's body. Checking the state of the body, he realized he's been dead longer than either of his partners. He continued moving forward until he eventually found the person who took the trademark of the killer. With the killer's back towards him, our protagonist shot him. But once he got a better look at the person, he realized it was his son. Full of hatred, his son became the murderer in order to get the attention of his father and to also die by the hands of his father. After this, our protagonist resigns from being a detective and starts over with Linda, hoping things would be better. Quite a bittersweet ending. So what's the moral of this story? Obsession and hatred can lead to dire consequences. And it's quite evident in both Kevin and our protagonists. Again, this is the final pin. Link in the description if you want to play the game. They also have other works if you're curious. Anyways, I hope you enjoyed this video. I better not catch you dying on me, and goodbye! Like and subscribe!